Okay, hello everyone. It may seem to many of you that both these white and black old photos and the talk about male friendship into a socialist military long gone together with the socialist country it was supposed to protect, and which it terribly failed to do, can be a bit outdated and maybe not really a great fit to today's workshop. As friendship stands kind of in a sharp opposition to violence and nationalism, and we could hear from Brandon also what would be these driving forces of masculinity imagination that usually come to our minds. And on the other hand, of course, as I'm talking of Yugoslavia and post-Yugoslav lands, it may seem a bit of nostalgic and escapist to bring this kind of romantic photos to your attention when I'm speaking about the area which actually is a trademark for violence in Europe in the last half of century, if not more. I'm speaking about the country that violently dissolved in terrible ethnic violence in the 90s. So speaking about this kind of romantic bonds between men who serve in the army may look like as I want to basically silence some other narratives. But of course, that's not my intention. And I still believe that there is a good reason to listen to a talk of this kind when we talk about also modern crisis and modern ideas of masculinity and their role in this crisis, essentially for the same reason Brandon was bringing into his talk, and that is this need to diversify our ideas of masculinity and be more tentative to very great variation in what masculinity can be and how it work both in the crisis and in its aftermath. And for me, the friendships made in the Yugoslav army are still very important and also integral. The violence that happened in the 90s is not something that stands in sharp opposition to this friendship, but actually this violence is what structures their life the afterlife in the aftermath of Yugoslavia and Yugoslav conflicts in the 90s. And that also points to very important work of different relations, connections, affection among men. That work says that these affective ties have a capacity to provide, or at least to complicate, how we see the reality in the aftermath of the conflict, how we see the post-conflict, the aftermath of the ethnic conflict, and maybe to provide those of you with a little bit of background, those of you who are not very familiar with socialism and Yugoslavia and maybe even Yugoslav conflicts. Yugoslav military was based on the mandatory draft, universal mandatory draft that basically included all men in the country who turned 18 or 27 in some cases, depending what they study. So actually all men served in the army. And I won't bother you much about how it worked. It's kind of pretty typical institution of the time, similar to some other socialist and other conscription-based militaries. But what I want to stress here is that the Yugoslav military was one of the really Yugoslav institutions and was also devised as such and ideologically conceptualized as such, because it provided young men with kind of a real Yugoslav experience that was not that easily acquired in some other life situations. So men from all parts of Yugoslavia were serving together. They were usually sent as far away from their home as possible. And the idea was really to make a combination between dramatic diversity of men coming from all corners of the country, putting together illiterate men with university graduates, urban guys with shepherds and so on. So to make to have military as a great equalizer that would provide an experience of togetherness beyond usual constraints defined by one's social background, educational background, place of living, language, and so on. So in that sense, that was also the reason I was interested in the Yugoslav army as a subject or object of my ethnographic, long-lasting ethnographic research, because actually all these same men who served in the army were killing each other in the 90s. And speaking with many of them, and I did that during the last 15 years, most of them, really the great majority of them, regardless of their class background, education, place of living, also regardless of their destiny in the conflict, would for one reason or another state, that was a valuable experience. I'm not implying that they would eagerly go back to serve in the army, of course, but they don't regret this year or year and a half or half years they spent in the Yugoslav military. I'll go back to that, what the reasons for this value would be. Of course, the friendship as such, when we relate it to the masculinity, is nothing new and nothing special for the Yugoslav military. Friendship is very important for building up all men, total institutions. It really figures as an important aspect of places where unity of men is supposed to be built, being it military as an institution, boarding school, even prison or so on. But on the other hand, friendship and the military, friendship and men are always in a kind of a tensious relationship. There is this belief that male friendship is usually thick and very pragmatic. So it's kind of thin, and pragmatic, not thick. So it's dependent on shared values and similarity between friends, and is a basis of Almerian notions of brotherhood of men, boys club, political solidarity, and so on. Then we usually see kind of really profound importance of male friendship in extreme situations, such as war and violence. So Foucault speaks about, he says, like, one can wonder how in these absurd and grotesque wars and infernal massacres, the men managed to hold on in spite of everything. And of course, he finds the answer is the emotional fabric that was built among them. So affection among men, not necessarily, of course, homosocial or homosexual, is something that makes situations of extreme violence bearable. The friendships I'm talking about, on the other hand, are much more in the realm of the ordinary, banal, in a way, everyday, quotidian, although of course the very military service was outside of the everyday life. Nothing special was going there. It was a time of repetitive procedures and tasks the men had to perform during their service, of very ritualized life, ritualized language, long afternoons when these men did not have anything to do. And this was the context in which the friendships emerged. And these friendships, of course, having in mind that these were very, very diverse men, would follow several lines of logic, but would rarely follow the logic of ethnic identification. It's not that Serbs would hang out with Serbs and Croats with Croats. much more important were moral characteristics of being a good man, and of course very often common cultural background, so men who would listen to the same kind of music or read similar books would hang out together. So this kind of, we find lots of narratives about this kind of friendship of men similar in their worldview from the Yugoslav army. And one of these is the story of Branislav and Ivica, two men. And this story made it, I will go back to that later, to media in Serbia. It's just one of many, many stories of the friendship of from the Yugoslav army that becomes kind of men who become reconnected after 3 decades since the Yugoslavia actually disintegrated. But here you can read basically how these men frame this similarity in cultural terms as very important, or not only similarity in cultural terms, but being in the same situation in life, having similar experience, and so on. It's the same with another two men. I talked with Bojger a lot, and he has this friend Đura. Bojger is from Croatia, Đura is from Serbia. And Bojger, in a way, really admired his friend Đura, and they were very similar. They were already family men, already graduated from the university when they served the army service, and that connected them. I already mentioned that the story of the first two men, Branislav and Ivica, made it to an internet website portal in former Yugoslavia and Serbia, I believe. Basically, at the first place, because there are two men who are a Serb and a Croat, and that was very important for media framing of this story. And they themselves say, of course, we talk about divisions, war, and the dissolution of Yugoslavia, but as mature and serious person, we could respect and accept each other, and this healthy, as they say, this healthy degree of nationalism, which does not harm our friendship. So reading these lines, we basically can see a kind of conclusion of a process of making something which Mila Drago, which is her recent book, calls immoral communities. She actually discussed this concept by zooming what was going on in Croatia in the war period. And she exposes the newly fixed frames of belonging that were the only one, the single characteristic of citizens, of people, really mattered, and that was their ethnicity. So, of course, in ethnically mixed areas that had very serious and important implications. And in such communities, instead of perceiving each other in terms of personal traits or community roles, people first consider ethnicities. And this logic of recognition and organization does not only flatten individual biographies, because basically everything that mattered about the person is his or her ethnicity, but also significantly closed political horizons. As Mila Drago pointed out, amoral communities are places where individuals don't feel free to express their narratives, their personal views, if those views don't align with one of those dominant views or narratives of their perceived ethnic group. So they need to align with their own ethnic group. And in such places, a person of certain cultural identity automatically has to have certain political views, and one does not give them any space to think otherwise. Of course, it's not, this is one of the scenarios, what's happened with the friendships from the Yugoslav army. And you really now have, if you look at the Facebook, there are many, many posts of people who meet each other after 30 years or 20 years or 40 years, even after not even knowing about each other, whether they are well and alive after divorce and so on. But very often, of course, exactly because of the violence of the 90s, these friendships cannot be restored. The reunions cannot happen, not only because some of these men are not among us anymore, but also because some of these men are not changed profoundly and become strictly belonging to their newly defined communities. And this is the story of another two men, which I mentioned, and this is Bojger from Zagreb and Đuro from Belgrade. They were friends. After the army service, they continued visiting with each other, but then the war started and Bojger called Đuro to Belgrade and wanted to talk to him, but Đuro's wife, Đuro does not want to talk to him anymore because he's Ustaša and Đuro will go to Knin to defend his Serb brother. So after that, they never spoke to each other. But of course, for Bojger, this is something irresolvable in his own biography. He simply still cannot come to terms with the fact that his best friend from the army does not want to have anything with him only because they belong to two different ethnicities. And this unsettles biographies and signals in a very immediate way to people that what is given as a present, it's not necessarily the only present one can have. And of course, for many men in former Yugoslavia, going from the 90s meant a lot of trauma, a lot of uprooting, a lot of changing of places, changing of professions and so on. And these are two men, two artists who met serving their army service at Mali Lošinj in Croatia. And last year they participated in an exhibition at Museum of Yugoslavia dedicated to migration. Dejan is the guy on my and yours left side, and Showba is on our right side. Showba lives in New York right now, and Dejan in Toronto. And here is like their photo from the army and the reenactment of that photo made 5 years ago in New York, basically. And they exhibited these two photos, and what they told me that we wanted to say, despite of everything, we are still here, and it is us, and we are still not only friends, but we are the same people who were in the army in the 87 and dreamt of our artistic careers when our service is over, and listened to the same music. And despite actually the fact that their lives became pretty damaged in the years that came, they insist not only on connection between the two of them, but also on connection between the men on one photograph and the other, and continuity in the life, which is, of course, became very discontinued in so many ways. But actually, maybe the most important for me and for thinking of meanings and working of friendship made in the Yugoslav military are not the friendship of the men who got together because of the similarity between them, but the other kind of friendship, the friendship between the men who basically would never meet each other without serving in the Yugoslav army. The men so different from each other that they would probably not come together in the course of their lives. And there are so many stories of that kind. You can find them also around. There is this story about philosopher Boris Budden and his friend Jeton from Kosovo. They both served in Belgrade. And since Jeton has never been in a larger city, Boris Budden was somehow got an assignment to take care about him when they go to the city, when they have free afternoon or evening. Just because also Jeton did not speak Serbo-Croatian, they did not really have common language except of exchanging some curse words. They couldn't really communicate, but that connection between them remains important for Boris. After so many years, he has a small article even about that. And these friendships between very different men are based on care and solidarity and driven by them. After all, the Yugoslav army was a total oppressive institution with a lot of drill, with a lot of masculinity practices and demands driven by quite hegemonic notions of masculinity. So not every man was, it was not easy for every man. So those physically capable would help those who were weak. Those who finished school would help those illiterate. So all kinds of help, care, and support was there and provided the basis for the friendship of very, very different.
Anya, can you wrap up?
Yes, I have like 2 minutes. Can I?
One minute.
Okay. So maybe I will simply finish with one such story, and this is the story of Haris, his friend Đurica. Haris, when he started speaking about Đurica, said, "We care about each other." Haris was already finished high school, medical high school at the moment. He served in the army, so he was assigned to be to work as in an infirmary. And Đurica was pathologically afraid of darkness, so Haris would put him in quarantine every day just to avoid him being sent to night watch, which he was very afraid of. Đurica was accordion player, almost illiterate for a Serbian village. And Haris was from Bosnia, from Zvornik. After the army service, a couple of years later, the conflicts in Yugoslavia started. Đurica's parents called Haris to join them in this Serbian village and to escape draft mobilization of everything that was clear will happen in Bosnia. That invitation Haris did not accept. Actually, when the conflict started, he found himself in Prijedor. He was visiting his girlfriend at the moment. Prijedor was dominated at that moment by Serbian paramilitaries. They captured him, and he spent several months in the Trnopolje concentration camp, where he also used his knowledge from the army, where he was in the infirmary, and tried to help other inmates who had medical problems. Haris went as far away as to Australia while most of his family got killed in the Srebrenica genocide. And for Haris, Đurica is a kind of stitch that holds together two very separate parts of his life, parts separate by unthinkable pain and trauma. And he has this affection for Đurica, which does not come materialized. They sometimes exchange some very formal short messages on Facebook, but what Đurica means to Haris is something incomparably bigger than the communication they can maintain after so many years. And I will maybe finish with that these friendships do not actually, when they work in the present, questioning the giveness of this ethno-nationalized reality of Yugoslav, post-Yugoslav societies, these friendships do not work through the presence, through continuity, but at the opposite. They work through the absence, through hesitation, through thinking of someone very often, but not daring to call that person because you don't know at the first place whether that person is alive or not. But these men still cherish the memories of the friends and these memories are not only personal, intimate affections, they have their political dimensions because they actually unsettle the present and also remind constantly of possible futures that got lost through Yugoslav ethnic conflicts. Thank you.